How is everybody today? Good. We're glad that you're here. We're glad that we have a new Sunday school class member. We're always glad, especially when we get young people coming into our Sunday school. We're glad to have visitors. I'm sorry you weren't able to get back into Texas, but it may be a little while. I've worked all that area from Houston to Galveston to Corpus Christi and Brownsville and Harlingen. Problem is, as you know, the water doesn't run off. I mean, 5 inches of water creates flooding problems. And it looks like they're going to have 35 inches. So we'll certainly remember those people in our prayers. What a lot of people don't realize about Houston, it's the 4th biggest city in the United States of America. And 2 days ago, they were essentially out of bread and water and other critical supplies. And so hard to get stuff into a place that's flooded, so we'll certainly remember them in our prayers. You know, I came this morning with high hopes. I came knowing Charles was going to be here, and I came to show Charles my new blazer that's got real pretty gold buttons, and check out that lining. And I almost felt embarrassed to show that to Charles after I saw how he was dressed. And then I looked and there was Walt. And so, Walt, would you please stand for us? We really appreciate that color showing up. We hope it'll show up some more. So thank you, Walt, for being so courageous. That's all, Walt. You can sit down. I'm calling that an old UT orange. I was not as bold. I've got all kind of bold UT ties, and I like to wear them at least for the first game. This is actually a UT tie. And if you get out a microscope, you can see the T on it, and you can see the Smoky Dog on it. So that's as bold as I'm going to be for this season. But we're glad everybody is here today. We're glad that you got to see the eclipse. Lots of you have been talking about that. That was a remarkable kind of an event. And so I wish I could say I hope we all live to see another one, but that might be stretching things a little bit. But we're glad that you got to. Many of y'all went up to Athens. We went up to Athens and went up to this little place north of town that we knew about and had a great view. Had my son and daughter and my 3 grandchildren and my mother-in-law and my wife and me. And so we had 4 generations watching the eclipse. And as we came back, I kind of thought, you know, the eclipse was great, but to be able to share that with people that are people you love most in life, that was a pretty big deal. And none of them, George, decided to eat my Cinnabon, so you got to be careful. That's what they told you, George. I want to tell you about the week I've had this week, okay? I spent 3 days in Washington, not the state, but the District of Columbia. I had not been to Washington in a long time, not on purpose, just hadn't been there in a while. And so it was a kind of an intriguing experience that's left me reflecting for the latter part of this week, and I'd love to share a few of those reflections with you. I would tell you that, like probably everybody in this room has done millions of times, but we landed at Reagan Airport, and I was on the right-hand side of the plane as far as the landing was concerned, and it was not quite dark, and so there was the Capitol all lit up, and there was the Lincoln Memorial all lit up, and the Jefferson Memorial, and the Washington Monument, just like all of you have seen many times. I could pick out the Watergate from that airplane. I could pick out the Smithsonian, just like you have many, many times. I'm not sure that qualifies for me to go to work for Charles. I'm not sure he wants to employ someone that can recognize the difference between the Washington, D.C. skyline and the skyline of San Francisco or the skyline of Atlanta that we all know so well, et cetera, et cetera. But I can tell you that we were in fact landing at Washington, and I saw everything that you've seen out the airplane window yourself. I had never been in the Wolseley Park area of Washington. Some of you probably know where that is. We have a young man that lives across the street from us that lives there. But in order to go back and forth to Wolseley Park, you don't have to go through downtown, and you don't go past all of the things that you're used to seeing. And so basically, besides the fact I was in a Marriott convention hotel and they all look just alike, for 3 days you really didn't have anything that would have given you a reference point for Washington. So I can tell you that I was in Washington for 3 days, but it was a kind of a different sort of experience. First thing I would say to you is I did not in 3 days see a single solitary politician. I didn't see one politician. I didn't see one Democrat, one Republican, one independent, one whatever. When I asked about that, I was told that they were all on vacation. The towns seem to be running wonderfully, so I wonder if maybe more vacations might be important. But across that period of time, I didn't see a single politician. I would also tell you that across that period of time, I did not see anybody that I would have identified as a dignitary. I did not experience traffic being stopped for a king or a prime minister. I didn't see anybody that looked like they had just come in on a gold carpet from somewhere in the United Nations. I didn't see anyone that looked like that they were a dignitary in any way. In fact, there were fewer suits and ties than I think I'd ever experienced at a trip to Washington. Maybe, and this might come as a surprise to you, I saw no protesters. And so in 3 days, I didn't see anybody that was on the left wing protesting against people on the right wing. And I didn't see anybody on the right wing protesting against people on the left wing. I didn't see a single solitary fight break out anywhere. I was a little bit surprised. I did not see any hate signs. I didn't see any sign pushing forward one political agenda or another. I didn't see any writing on the sides of buildings. I didn't see any of the iconography of any of the hate groups that seem so populous in our country. And so I didn't see the first sign indicating any kind of political preference that somebody might have. And then I was so busy and I got so tired, I didn't even turn on the television. And so I didn't, in 3 days, see one word of news. I didn't hear one political pundit or commentator in Washington, D.C. And out on the streets, I did not see one single solitary news van racing from one news event to the other. And so if it hadn't have been for the fact that I had seen the skyline, staying in Wolseley Park and just kind of passing close to town wouldn't have been all that much different if I'd have said I'd been traveling down the main street at Signal Mountain. And so it was a really surprising trip. The only thing that made it distinctively Washington was the skyline. Now, I'll take that back a little bit. I did see 2 statues. And we seem to have become very statue conscious in our country today. I did see a statue that all of you have seen of Andrew Jackson. In fact, I looked twice to make sure it was really old Andrew Jackson because I figured it might have been down by now. And I thought in the last few weeks, as we've become so fascinated with statues, it seems, that if you lived in East Tennessee, and if you know any of the history of East Tennessee, then old Andy's statue's probably got to come down. If you had lived in Athens, Tennessee, where I grew up and where you went to see the eclipse, you would know that a really, really strong and important citizen with the last name of Keith, there's a Methodist church named after him, made his way to see his best friend, John Marshall, who was Supreme Court Justice of the United States, made his way from Athens, Tennessee, to go and to take an agenda and to take a list of important names and to take a group of people that were very much into a cause. And their cause was the Cherokee Indians, some of those people that may even be ancestors of some of us in this room. And they thought that what Andrew Jackson was doing to the Indians was terribly wrong, and that the Trail of Tears and all that went with it was something that was very ungodly. Those East Tennesseans that went to Washington to try to save the relationship with our Cherokee brothers and sisters, they probably would be ready for that statue to come down. So I did see a statue. And then, of course, if you're going back into Reagan Airport, you can't avoid seeing Ronald Reagan's statue out there because the place is named after him. But when you see Ronald Reagan's statue, it doesn't remind you of any political perspective or position or much of anything. It doesn't remind you of much of anything that Reagan may have done right or wrong or somewhere in between. It just looks like somebody there with a happy kind of movie star look on his face who's saying, y'all come on back now. And I found that to be of no offense whatsoever, that at Reagan International Airport they happen to have a statue of Ronald Reagan. I've seen similar statues of George Bush at Dallas, at Houston's airport, and on down the list. So there were statues there, but I'm not sure the statues I saw had very much implication. And so I would call that a very, very unusual trip to Washington, D.C. No politicians, no dignitaries, no pundits, no TV cameras, no protesters. A couple of statues, yeah, and we'll figure that one out. But it was a kind of an unusual trip to Washington, D.C. Well, now you're wondering why I'm there and what I was doing. I went to a meeting of something called the International Coaches Federation. There's 150,000 of those people nationwide. At this particular meeting, there were 2,000 of them. I got to talk to them a couple of times. They're a group of people that are very, very mission-oriented. They're a group of people that believe that human beings can get at cross purposes with each other. Sometimes those human beings are husbands and wives or members of families, and these people try to work with those kind of folks. Sometimes those people are people that run businesses and industries, and they can't get along well with each other, and so everything about what they're trying to accomplish is jeopardized because of that. They're people that work with individuals that are mentally ill and that are socially ill. They work in everything from penthouses along Madison Avenue to prison cells in the outback of Louisiana. They are coaches and they are counselors and they are people that think it is their mission in life to try to help individuals get on a better track with each other, and individuals who are trying to help people maybe even sometimes get on a better track with themselves. These were the most ordinary looking people you've ever seen in all your life. They wore clothes just like you'll see right on the streets of Chattanooga. Some of them were very made up. Some of them looked like they hadn't discovered makeup yet. Some of them were old, some of them were young, some of them were skinny, some of them were fat. There were people of every variety of human being that you could imagine. There were people there from all over the world, and so I got to try to see if my East Tennessee accent could kind of work with people from New Jersey and from New Guinea, with people from China, even people from Russia that were there, who have counseling and coaching practices to try to minister to the needs of people in their own country. There was every kind of person in the world in that meeting, but they were people that had a common mission. And that mission was not to run anything. And that mission was not to use power for wealth. That mission was not to try to figure out some way of changing the destiny of a world or a nation from the outside with weapons. There were people of all different stripes from all over the world who had the mission of trying to figure out ways that they could better help people that were in trouble, and people that were in trouble with each other, and people that maybe didn't really always understand themselves very well. It was amazing the energy that was in their rooms. It was amazing the common purpose that was in their rooms. It was amazing how their conversations were not about the kinds of things we explosively find ourselves talking about or having to talk about every day. Their conversations were more about people in trouble and being able to give their lives in ways to helping people in trouble. I came home and Phyllis says, well, what was it like at your meeting? And I said, it was like Wetmore. And she knew exactly what I was talking about. The first church that I served as a full-time legalized preacher was the Wetmore Baptist Church in North Polk County, between Benton and Etowah, right north of the Wassee River, one of the prettiest places in the world. You would think that there in Polk County, in a little Baptist church in the late 1960s, you would think that that would be about as backwoodsy and down home, and we didn't have the word then, but redneck as you could possibly imagine. I was in my sophomore year at Wesley, and Phyllis and I were getting married. Those people couldn't find a preacher, and so everything kind of worked out well for everybody, and I thought anybody can go and spend 2 years in Polk County, then I'll be on somewhere else. Most gracious group of people I ever served in the church. A group of people who spent the majority of their energy not talking about political issues, and boy, they had raged in Polk County, but talking about a group of people that lived on this place called G Creek. Now, G Creek's a campground now, and you can go down there and probably have a pretty good time. In the 1960s, G Creek was the most oppressed, downtrodden, poverty-stricken place in all of Polk County, and that was saying a lot. They had shacks down there. I never went into any one of those shacks that had a real floor. It was always a dirt floor. They had color TVs sitting in their buildings sometimes because they had moonshine stills back out in the woods somewhere. It was such a scary place that the county wouldn't even send school buses in there to collect kids to take them to school. And that church made G Creek its reason for existence. They made sure those kids had presents at Christmas. They went down, and I was with them talking about protesters, and sat in the middle of a county council meeting and didn't leave until they agreed to send school buses back in there. They'd have Bible school for these kids. I've been called in the middle of the night, as many of those people at that church were, because somebody in G Creek needed to go to the hospital, and they were always taken. And these last 3 days that I spent in Washington, they felt like Wetmore, because they felt like that there was, shall I use the word, congregation of people whose reason for existence was to try to help other people in need, and especially the needs arise when people can't get along with each other and people can't find ways to match up and find peace between each other. It felt more like church than almost anywhere I've been in years upon end, except this church and this Sunday school class. I wanted to take those nearly 2,000 people and put them on buses and let them invade the Capitol building and the mall and the White House and all those other places down there, except they were all on vacation. one night I was invited out to eat. And I was tired. And I said, I really am not interested in going down and getting on that subway and going into downtown Washington, go to some fancy place and eat a bunch of food. It'll take us 3 hours. And the person that invited me said, oh, we won't have to do that. We'll just go across Connecticut Avenue. So we walked out of the back of this Marriott hotel and walked down to Connecticut Avenue. And all of a sudden, the world was laid out there. And we stood there and looked up and down the street, and the guy that I was having dinner with said, take your choice, not of restaurant, but of country. I don't know that there was a country that wasn't represented within eyesight. And so guess what I thought? And this was probably a mistake. I said, well, I've had all kind of Mexican food and French food and Italian food, yada, yada, yada. I see there's a Portuguese restaurant down there. I said, what do Portuguese eat? And so the guy said, well, I have no idea. And so we went to a Portuguese restaurant. Any of y'all ever eaten Portuguese? Charles has. Well, good for you, Jim. Good for you all. Portuguese are like Americans. They like chicken. In other words, every kind of chicken that you can imagine. Except one little difference. They like chicken hot. My sinuses still haven't gotten over the wonderful Portuguese chicken that I ate. I got a little sample bottle of some hot stuff that my son thinks he likes hot. I'm going to slip that in on him, by the way. But it was amazing down there to see people of every ilk imaginable going up and down those streets, going in and out of those restaurants, sitting around until it got dark on the park benches that were arrayed everywhere. And there was no talk of war, and there was no talk of political persuasion. There was no talk of what you believed about who or what. There was a lot of concern for Texas, and some of these people never had even been to Texas, but they understood that people were probably getting ready to hurt, and they were talking about that. I can tell you that I went into Washington with a kind of a bad taste in my mouth because of all the kinds of stuff that we've seen so much of for so long. I'll tell you, I went out of Washington with a really good taste in my mouth because I clearly saw that if we can ever get behind the scenes of all the stuff that's thrown at us every day on television, we can ever get behind the scenes, we're going to find people, often people that are living their lives around a mission, and people that if they're given a chance won't fight with each other, but will help each other. Won't be putting each other down in every way they can think about by building each other up. That's the kind of Sunday school class we've got. That's the kind of church we've got, I think. That was the kind of people that came to that meeting in Washington. And would to God that their population could only increase. Because that's what takes us in the right direction. A common mission to help and to serve and to heal and to bring people together. Let us pray. Help us, our Father, that we might always, when we pray for our country and our leaders. But help us, Father, that we might not get sidetracked and polarized and taken off in directions that divide us from other people that if we were left alone, that we would probably get along with really well. Help us that we might not worry so much about the language of politics and the language of geographic and national difference, but help us that we might be concerned more with the way that people can step across language barriers and step across political barriers step across all kind of racial and economic barriers, and still be able to sit together on benches in a Portuguese restaurant and enjoy hot chicken. Help us that we might be much more concerned with what we have in common and the missions that we can undertake to unite each other with ourselves. Help us that we might be more like your Son. Help us that we might know he would be much more comfortable walking along Connecticut Avenue with people of every stripe and difference, rather than standing in the midst of an inferno of confrontation where people get so concerned with who's on what side. Help us, our Father, that we might be people of healing and helping, for we ask in your Son's name.